everybody, and happy Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us for another Breakfast by the Bay, Season 2. My name is Miss Megan, and behind the camera today we have Mr. Jeff, and you are joining us live from our Bay Center here in Providence. Again, we want to thank you for tuning in to our YouTube channel. If you have been enjoying Breakfast by the Bay so far, we ask you just to hit that subscribe button at the bottom. And also tell your friends and family about us here on our YouTube live channel. We would love your support. Also, if you have any questions throughout today's segment, just type them into the chat and we will try to get to them either during the segment or we will respond after we are done. Also, if you are from a school, you can put it right into the chat as well. We would love to give you a shout out. Awesome. So today we are going to talk a little bit about dams in Rhode Island. We're going to be talking about some traveling animals that go throughout the bay. We're going to touch a little bit about a huge structure called a hurricane barrier in Providence. And then stick around until the very end, because I am going to give you your own dam building activity that you can do right at home. So to get started today, we are first going to dive back into our Narragansett Bay chart. So if you remember, Narragansett Bay is a super important habitat, right? So we have very special kind of water here in the bay. If you remember, Narragansett Bay is made of salt water from the oceans, and then we also have fresh water coming in from the rivers and the streams. And then when those two waters come together, they create brackish water. So remember, we have that salty water from the ocean and the fresh water coming in from the rivers. Now, believe it or not, some animals will actually travel from the fresh water to the salt water or from the salt water to the fresh water, which is kind of a cool and unique concept for some of those animals. So we want to introduce you to a couple maybe new words for you today. The first one I'm going to tell you about is diadromous, and those are just animals that regularly migrate between salt water of the oceans and the fresh water of the streams and rivers. Now, that category of diadromous can be broken down into two kind of subsections. So you either have your anadromous fish, which just means that they're species that spawn in the fresh water, but they spend most of their lives in the salt water. Or you have your catadromous fish, that are animals that spawn at sea, but they spend most of their lives in the fresh water. We have two examples of those for you today. So in Rhode Island, we have our American shad and our river herring. And they both are anadromous fish species that have a unique life history. So river herring and shad hatch and mature in fresh water, but then migrate and spend most of their lives in the marine waters. After about 3 or 4 years, they return to their native freshwater ponds and streams to spawn. Once the eggs hatch, the larval fish remain in the freshwater until the summer and fall before returning to the open ocean to complete their life cycle. Kind of cool. So, what do these species have to do with dams? Well, let's talk a little bit more about dams and then we'll loop back to that question. So the first thing that we want to know is, what is a dam? Well, a dam is a structure built across a river or a stream to hold back water. And dams are constructed for many, many different purposes, including a reservoir creation, flood prevention, irrigation, and to harness some of that power so we can use it for hydroelectric power. Dams and their reservoirs also provide areas for boating and fishing as well. People have used many different materials to build dams throughout the centuries, Ancient dam builders used to use natural materials such as muds and clays and rocks, whereas modern day dam builders use more of the concrete. Now, before we dive too much into human dam building, it's important to know that humans are not the only animals that construct dams. Can you think of an animal that constructs a dam? If you said a beaver, you are correct. And I have a picture right here of a beaver dam. Now, if you remember, beavers build dams across streams to create a pond where they can build a beaver lodge or their home to live in. And these ponds that they create from their dams help them hide from their predators, like wolves and coyotes. Awesome. So now we're going to switch gears back to our humans, and we're going to talk a little bit more about human dams. So during the colonial times, dams were constructed throughout Rhode Island to harness water power. The arrival of the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th century resulted in the increased number of larger dams throughout the area. By the early 20th century, over 500 dams had been constructed in Rhode Island streams and rivers. Now, this system of dams worked well for many years for growth and change throughout Rhode Island. But there were some issues that arose due to the construction of these dams. Following the Industrial Revolution, many of the dams that were built to harness that energy prevented these anadromous fish from reaching their spawning and nursery sites that they once used to go to. It's not all bad news, though, right? Throughout the years, much work has been done to return these streams and these rivers to the way that they used to be. And this allows those fish to return to their historical spawning sites. So a couple of things that have been done is when it is safe and can be done, we can actually remove a dam that's on a stream or a river. And then that will eventually return that river or that stream back to the way it was before that dam was put there. And those fish can just easily travel up and down that river. Now, sometimes we can't always remove a dam. So humans have invented other ways to help those fish return to their historical spawning sites. And one of the ways is called a fish ladder. Now what happens is humans will construct a fish ladder on the side. And you can see this one's kind of more of like a whirlpool one. So those fish can start at the bottom, start swimming through the circles, and then going through the maze and up through the dam. Another example of a fish ladder, it's a little bit of a different design, is this one right here. They built it off to the side, and what those fish can do is they can actually jump from each tier to each tier so that they can get back to their original spawning sites. And what that means is they just want to get back to those places where they can lay their eggs, right? So spawning, they're laying their eggs, the beginning of their life cycle. Awesome. So that's a little bit about our smaller dams in Rhode Island. The last thing I want to touch upon before I give you your activity is our Fox Point Hurricane Barrier. Now, if you've ever driven across 195 in Providence, you might have seen a kind of peculiar structure underneath the bridge. Now, a lot of us might know that that is the Fox Point Hurricane Barrier. It's a 3,000-foot long tidal flood barrier spanning the Providence River. It was constructed between 1960 and 1966 to protect the low-lying downtown area of the city from damaging storm surge and floods associated with hurricanes and other major storm events. The gate was closed during the gale on January 10, 1978, to prevent 2 feet of water from flooding downtown Providence. And then in 1985, the hurricane barrier was utilized once again, sparing downtown Providence from being flooded by 2 feet of water from the storm brought by the Hurricane Gloria, keeping the city nice and dry. And then in 1991, the barrier spared the city from Hurricane Bob, which would have covered downtown in over 4 feet of water. So not just another great engineering feat by us humans to help with that flooding. So I know that was a lot of information about traveling animals throughout Rhode Island and a little bit about some of the barriers that they have to get through and some of the things that humans can do to help those animals get back to their original spawning site. The last thing I'm going to leave you with today is your own activity to do at home. Now, I'm going to have my own materials here, but you can definitely use some of your materials that you have at home to build your very own dam. So, what you need is some sort of container. It doesn't have to be a clear container. It can be any kind of small container, or if you really want to get adventurous, you can do a big container. Then what I did is, if you see my purple and pink clay right here, I put that in as my base. So I kind of have that as like my river bed and my sediment that my dam is going to be built into. From there, I started to construct my own dam. Now, for the materials that I used, I allowed myself 1 piece of tape. I allowed myself 4 popsicle sticks. And I also gave myself some gravel or some rocks. Now, some other ideas that you might be able to have at home is if you have any Play-Doh around, you can definitely use some Play-Doh. Or maybe even some rubber bands to try to keep your construction together. I had some blocks of wood that I might have used, or maybe even some Legos at home, or maybe even some toothpicks. So what you can do is you can challenge yourself to build your own dam, and then you can actually test your dam out to see if it's going to hold water or not. Now, I have built this dam just fresh this morning. I haven't tested it out, but we're about to test it out right now. So what I did is I had Mr. Jeff give me 2 cups of water, and I wanted to measure out my water because if I'm going to repeat this experiment, I want to do it with the same amount of water, see if I can hold the same amount. So what you would do is you would construct your dam. Once you think it's sturdy enough, you would pour your water in, and then you can have a timer going as well to see how long your dam holds that water for. No leaks yet. My dam is holding. And remember, if your dam doesn't hold, you can always try to deconstruct it and then reconstruct it using different materials. I hope that you guys had a great time today. Thank you again for joining us for another Breakfast by the Bay. And we will see you again next Wednesday at 10 o'clock. Bye, guys.